Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the introduction, Councilwoman Hamlin. As you stated, my name is Tom Behrens. I'm the city planner with the firm Burgess Associates.
Tom, bring the microphone a little closer, just so we can hear you. Yeah, and don't move, apparently.
I'm watching.
Don't move. I can move my eyes, right? Okay. Start up. All right. Good evening, Tom Behrens, planner with the firm Burgess Associates. We represent the city as both planner for the governing body as well as the planning board and zoning board of adjustment. I've had the privilege of serving as the in-house planner for Summit since 2017. Here tonight to give an overview of an ordinance establishing a new Morris Broad Crossroads overlay zone, which encompasses block 2706, lots 1, 2, 3, and 4, which includes the city-owned firehouse site as well as the Chestnut parking lot. The ordinance documents that the council has before them includes the implementing ordinance, Exhibit A, which establishes the regulations for the MBC overlay zone, Exhibit B, which is the overlay zone map, and Exhibit C, which provides an update to the DRO schedule of space regulations. So just to give a brief introduction of the site, though it seems like everyone's pretty familiar with it at this point. Again, the site's identified as block 2706, lots 1, 2, 3, and 4. 3 of the parcels are city-owned with the exception of lot 2. This tract totals a land area of approximately 1.6 acres and has 3 frontages, including on Broad Street, Morris Ave, and Chestnut Street. And the site is currently located in the city's B business zone. Lot 1, attempt to use the clicker here. Can't really see, but it's over on the left. That would be the Chestnut, public Chestnut parking lot, which is currently developed with 59 surface parking spaces. In the middle, this little sliver of a parcel, you can follow me down from the green, is Lot 2, which is the one privately owned lot. It's about 20 feet wide and currently developed as a driveway and parking. Over to the right, the corner lot, Lot 3, again, follow my pointer if you can, down is the current firehouse site, soon to be vacated, as was mentioned. And just below that, the smaller parcel is Lot 4, which is currently developed with a 2-story office building and surface parking in the front yard area. There we go. All right. So just to give an overview of the lay of the land and development surrounding the site, north is pointing up in this case. The site being in the middle, we have the northerly half of this pizza-shaped block, 2706. To the north, we have the city's Summit Housing Authority Vito Gallo Senior Housing Building. There's a surface parking lot just to the right of that building, sort of the top middle of your screen. We also have a commercial building immediately across Broad Street, as well as a 7-Eleven, again to the north. To the east of the site, we have the YMCA building. To the south, we have a funeral home and St. Teresa Memorial Hall. And to the west, across Morris Avenue, we have St. Teresa's Church, excuse me. So just to give an overview of the current zoning designation, which again is the B business zone, thought it important to give an overview of what that zone currently permits. And there are 7 B zones that currently exist throughout the city, along the city's various commercial corridors. So currently, the B zone permits a number of principal uses, including traditional retail uses, personal service, et cetera. But as it pertains to this site, it also promotes other, we'll call them unusual, but maybe uses that would be deemed to be inconsistent with the goals for this site, which include theaters, funeral parlors, automobile sales, private clubs, and adult daycare. It also permits a number of conditional uses, including gasoline service stations, auto repair, and houses of worship. So again, it's pretty clear that a number of these permitted uses would be inconsistent with the city's vision for the site and not necessarily desirable in this location, and wouldn't maximize the opportunity to develop the site. And in addition, the B zone only permits residential uses above the first floor, which limits the residential potential of the site. To give an overview of the B zone bulk regulations, we'll note that the B zone does not currently have requirements for a minimum lot area standard, does not regulate density, and does not prescribe setbacks, meaning you could develop a building right up to the property lines with a 0-foot setback from the front yard, side yard, and rear yard. It also prescribes a maximum lot coverage of 90%, has a maximum building coverage of 30%, and is limited by a maximum building height of 3 stories and a maximum floor area of 75%. So in thinking about how to develop a new zoning framework, our office was tasked with creating a new overlay zone, which, as Councilwoman Hamlet mentioned, will be retaining the underlying B zone designation. And on top of that will be an alternative zoning framework, which a prospective developer can take advantage of and would have to follow the permitted uses and new bulk requirements being prescribed for that overlay zone. And what this does is allow us to target the zoning specific to these 4 parcels without undermining or impacting the existing B zone. And again, there are 7 B zones located throughout Summit. I think all of you are aware the site's been studied pretty extensively at this point, has gotten a lot of public input, so we've considered all of that. And from our observations, those conversations over the years have resulted in general goals and ideas for the site, which again we've taken into consideration. One of our first tasks was to look at the B zone to see how that designation could be maximized. What's the most we could build there? And it was determined that that was too limiting, so we used that sort of as a floor in terms of coming up with a new zoning framework. We were also aware of prior development concepts for the site, which were deemed, through a number of public meetings to be, frankly, too intense for the site. So the effort here was to strike a balance between the two. Again, being the B zone sort of at the lower end, and other development concepts previously discussed at sort of the higher end. And also, based on our experience with the city, we've looked at other existing zones. We tried to, be consistent with what already existed in the DRO, as well as actual development that already exists or has been approved by either the planning board or the zoning board. And just to give 2 specific examples, we looked at the Gateway 1 zone, which is located immediately north of the CRBD, just between Parmley Place to the north and DeForest to the south at the intersection of Summit Avenue. It was developed around 2012, I believe, with a 3-story condo building on the north end of the property, parking structure in the middle, and a 4-story office building to the south. Again, that was just one zoning framework that we looked at. And we also recognized a recent zoning board approval for what's called the Turcano Park application, which is located sort of the northerly end of Morris Avenue, right just south of the intersection with River Road. And that approval was for a 46-unit multifamily development on about 1.15 acres. So the intent here was not to design the site, but to create a flexible zoning framework with controls to encourage creative development solutions. So the next step, assuming some form of this ordinance or some form of this ordinance gets adopted, the next step would be to go out to bid, and then prospective developers could come up with ideas. And again, using the development framework in terms of permitted uses, bulk standards, can come up with a viable development alternative. And so getting to this slide finally, these are specific goals that we considered as, to try to back into the prescribed bulk framework. The first goal is to incentivize private development of the properties by implementing zoning changes appropriate to the unique location at a crossroads of town. This site, I think it's been acknowledged, serves as a gateway to the downtown. It serves as a transitional area between residential zones, generally to the south and west, and the downtown, and it's also within walking distance to the train station. The second goal was to maximize value and tax ratables of the properties by selling them sort of as a bundled package, by selling them together through a competitive public bidding process. Third goal was to address a portion of the city's affordable housing obligations by requiring at least one multifamily housing building with a mandated affordable housing set aside. As was mentioned previously, this site is not currently a mechanism identified in the city's housing plan, so it could be used to address a portion of the city's either third round or looming fourth round obligation to be determined. Fourth goal, to accommodate several other public purposes, including usable open green space, public parking adjacent to public uses in the downtown, as well as providing accessibility to the adjacent St. Teresa Memorial Hall. And these were all things that have been discussed, again, by the community at length at prior conversations around the site. And then a fifth goal to establish zoning parameters that ensure the development of the site is appropriately scaled and consistent with surrounding development. And ultimately, we wanted to provide uses which complement but don't compete with the downtown. Stay on track. All right. So this slide presents the overlay zone bulk requirements as compared to the B zone. So just to note, the prospective developer has to come up with a plan for the entirety of the site. So that's lots 1, 2, 3, and 4. They do total land area of about 1.6 acres. We built in a little wiggle room and made the minimum 1.5 acres, just in case there had to be a road dedication or some skewing of the land. There's been, in our experience in these situations, there's some concessions that are made on occasion. So this anticipates that or allows for that sort of situation. We do prescribe a density range, meaning that we're guaranteed to have some level of residential development. And again, that's based on feedback from the community. It also relates to the provision of affordable housing. So we provide a minimum density of 19 units per acre, which I know sounds like an interesting number, but that would yield 30 units on the tract, and a maximum density of 30 units per acre, which would yield upwards of 48 units. And again, the site would guarantee at least 30 units of residential housing, which would include a minimum of 7 affordable units in any scenario. The site will definitely provide at least 7 affordable housing units. Where the B zone doesn't have any prescribed setbacks, this overlay zone would have required setbacks of 15 feet from Broad Street, 10 feet from Cedar Street, 20 feet from Morris Avenue, and 40 feet from the southerly side lot line. It also includes a maximum lot coverage of 75%, which is actually a reduction from the current B zone maximum lot coverage of 90%, which allows for open space on the property and also reduces the stormwater runoff impact from the site. We also increased the building coverage from the B zone's 30% to 35% to increase a bit of flexibility. We've also increased the maximum building height from 3 stories to 4 stories. The caveat being that a 4th story would have to be stepped back, as they call it, or set back from the facade of the building. So you'd get to 3 stories, bump in 10 feet, and then you could continue with a 4th story, but no more than 4 stories. And finally, there's a maximum floor area ratio of 115%. What does that mean? That would yield a total floor area of approximately 80,000 square feet versus the maximum permitted FAR in the B zone, which would yield about 52,000 square feet. So we're talking about a net increase of about 30,000 square feet, and there's no bonuses or anything permitted, so what you see is what's there. There couldn't be a 5th story, there couldn't be additional density or FAR in this scenario. Just to give an overview of permitted uses in the zone, again, the B zone currently offers a range of uses, most of which are non-residential in nature. Here, we're prescribing something a bit different and a bit more targeted. The first principal permitted use being multifamily residential uses, mixed-use multifamily, and with a retail or retail food establishment component, where each non-residential use would be capped at 3,000 square feet. There would be office, excluding medical and dental offices, permitted. Let me rephrase that. Offices would be permitted, excluding medical and dental offices. And then finally, townhouses would be permitted, including stacked duplexes, which would mean a unit on top of another unit as opposed to a side-by-side unit. We've gone beyond the city's existing overlay zones by prescribing some additional requirements, again, to sort of control the level of development and guarantee certain outcomes while providing for development flexibility. And just to tick off a few of those additional requirements, again, we have the submission of a comprehensive site plan. So whoever is awarded the opportunity to purchase the site from the city would have to submit a plan for the entirety of the site. All 4 parcels, all 1.5, 1.6 acres. Versus having the parcels developed either individually and more of a piecemeal approach. We have a built-in maximum building length of 180 feet. One of the issues of prior development concepts had to deal with building length. The length of the site along Broad Street is over 500 feet. So the effort is to break up that bulk, have a green space in between. That's the next item, to have a minimum 9,000 square foot green space on the property with a minimum frontage of 100 feet on Broad Street. So basically that could give you a green space of about 100 feet in width and 90 feet in depth, again, fronting Broad Street. could be between two buildings in theory. And so, how do we arrive at 180 feet? So we looked at surrounding development, again, zoning frameworks, et cetera. The closest buildings to the site are the YMCA building to the east. It has a length along Broad Street of about 190 feet and along Maple Street of 150 feet. Then just across the road, across Broad Street, is the Vito Gala building, which has a length on Broad Street of about 200 feet. So 180 seemed to be about the sweet spot. Again, would allow for two buildings, would allow for a green space, and would allow for sort of, we'll call them end caps that could be either green space or plazas or some, sort of flexible, activated public space. We do have a mandatory affordable housing set-aside, as we mentioned, which is consistent with the city's settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing Center. It's consistent with its other overlay zones, and it's consistent with its mandatory set-aside ordinance. In terms of replacing the existing public parking spaces on the Chestnut lot, which I know has been a community concern, again, there are currently 59 spaces on the Chestnut lot. We're proposing to place at least 39 of those as surface parking on this site, and the remaining 20 spaces would be provided around the site as on-street parking. Right now, on-street parking is limited because the firehouse is there, and the street has to accommodate for the turning movements of fire trucks. Once the fire department is relocated, that can be redesigned in a manner that allows for parking, can shrink the dimensions of the road to reduce speeding, and generally create a more pedestrian-friendly environment. And then finally, the ordinance refers to the DRO for typical site plan requirements such as building design, lighting, landscaping, signage, et cetera. So again, the effort was not to design this, not to reinvent the wheel, but to rely on the DRO that was vetted extensively by the planning board just a few years ago. So to rely on their expertise, and again, ultimately assuming that, a subsequent step of this process would be the submission of a site plan to the planning board. And then finally, going over process, you had a sneak peek already. I just explained some of that. So the first step in the process is the ordinance introduction, which is what we're doing tonight. The next step in the process would be the ordinance goes to the planning board for master plan consistency review. The planning board will opine as to the extent the ordinance could be inconsistent in any way with the master plan, as well as offer any recommendations to the council for consideration. The ordinance would then go back to the common council, where you'd have the opportunity to adopt the ordinance. Assuming, again, the ordinance is adopted at some point, the city could then attempt to sell the property through a bid process and solicit bids from developers. Once a selection is made, that selection, an agreement could be established with that successful bidder, which includes terms about, further terms about how the property could be developed, could address affordable housing, will obviously include the sale and other negotiations for the property. And then finally, again, the developer will submit a comprehensive site plan to the planning board for consideration. And, in closing, I'll just note that the process is meant to be iterative. So the goal would be that, the first go around, you guys entertain a successful bid and things work great. There's a chance that may not happen. We might have to tweak the ordinance a bit. Or maybe you'll get a plan that's so great that will compel you to adjust the ordinance just a bit here or there. But we're intending to use this as a guiding, again, framework for how the site will be developed. So thank you for your time. Be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Behrens. Okay, I'm going to open it up to council comments. No? Okay. Oh.
Go ahead.
Oh, Councilman Miniger. You
Thank
have
you,
the floor.
Councilman. I was just writing the end of my question, so if I flub it, that's the reason why. You mentioned you wanted to incentivize, the reason the overlay zone was created was to incentivize use of that over the regular, the B zoning. I noticed that allows a fourth floor, so it adds the extra height. Step back. And it requires 9,000 square feet of green space. Is that enough of an incentive to counteract the space that would be in the B zone by itself for a developer, which can include 3 stories only, but 90% coverage, right, of the entire space?
So there's a few variables, one being the ultimate value of the land and the sale of the property based on an appraisal, to come. So that's one variable. But this overlay does allow for more development. I'll say, a reasonable amount of additional development, again, by virtue of additional height and additional floor area. So we're talking about an extra 30,000 square feet. So, in terms of incentivizing developers, again, it's to create flexibility so that they could do more with the site within the framework and based on the permitted uses. So with that respect, they can do more, frankly. But again, we tried to strike a balance between the B zone, which, perceived to be limiting. The city would get less for that. You can't build as much versus other, concepts that have come before the council where there's, maybe 5 stories, more FAR, et cetera. So again, this is sort of the middle ground we think is reasonable, seems to work. We also have to bear in mind that the site has to provide parking for the uses. So you get to a point where you do too much and you can't park the uses on the site. So this is a balancing act, and this is, we believe what's proposed is reasonable.
Sure. I have several, if that's okay. Just-
Okay, good.
So I have a question about the developer. So if the developer, whether, whichever zoning they decide to go with, if a developer buys this and then just sits on it for 2 years, do we have any recourse? Is there anything built into this, or?
That's a good question. It wouldn't be, in my opinion, appropriate to address it through the overlay zone, but it would be a term in an agreement, for the sale of the land. That can be negotiated. I think I would agree that the city wouldn't want to get in a position where this thing just lays, for 10 years and isn't developed. So I think everybody wants to see something happen here, especially with the fire department moving. So I think there are conditions that would be built into the agreement at
Okay.
that time.
Okay. Can a developer then sell it to another developer? Because I remember that was something that we always heard about, the possibility.
I don't want to play attorney, but I think that could be a condition.
Yeah, but that
In the
is a
sale.
condition of the sale that it can't be sold. Generally, what happens is, I think what you're thinking of is developers will go out and they'll enter into a contract with a right of first refusal. They'll try to get all the approvals, and then they'll take that approval and sell it to a bigger developer. But you can control that through the agreement process and the bidding process. You put it out, you bid it, you have to sell it, it's got to be developed in so long. That can all be handled, not at this level, but the next step if and when you go out to market the property.
Okay. And then in developing this, because it's complex, and the incentive you talk about, were there developers that you discussed this with to get an idea of whether this was enough of an incentive for them to go with the overlay?
We didn't get into that level of detail, but we've looked at prior appraisals for the property and again, considered zoning frameworks and again, being aware of what has been built in Summit. So we arrived at, again, what we thought was economically viable. But again, one of the major variables is the sale of the land. And that is a major driving factor in terms of what can be done. There may be other ways the city can assist down the road with, making sure that the project gets developed.
Sure. That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for
Thank
the
you.
presentation.
Thank you, Councilman Miniger.
Go ahead.
Only because you introduced, let me just go around. Okay. Councilman Boyer?
Yeah, just people watching, they could probably get lost in the inertia of, floor area ratio
Sure,
zones and all this
understood.
other stuff. So, at a high level, what is the main objective of zoning this? What are we trying to accomplish here?
So the goal would be so there are a number of public purposes that I mentioned, one being affordable housing, two, just doing something with the site that would otherwise lay vacant, replace public parking that's already there. And the idea of presenting a new overlay zone is that it's been determined that the existing zoning just doesn't provide enough incentive for a developer. And the city could do better in terms of what could be developed there. So again, it's to encourage creative development solutions. It does put a cap on how much could be developed in terms of the height of the buildings, in terms of the floor area ratio. And to your point, what does that mean? The floor area ratio is a metric which is the relationship of the volume of the buildings to the land. So in this case, you could build 80,000 square feet in 4-story structures on 1.5 acres, which is roughly 62,000 square feet, if that gives a frame of reference.
Thank you.
Thank you
Okay.
for that, because I know people watching would want to want to know what the purpose of us, doing this. The other thing is, my concern always is parking and traffic. We can barely get around Summit now. How does this overlay zone add to that, or how does this overlay zone decrease that or help the city in terms of getting around town?
Sure, and I know those were hot topics, again, in prior discussion. So I'll start with parking. So the framework is intended to fully park the uses on the site. And they're envisioned to be provided in an underground structure, but also through surface parking. We knew it was important for the community to replace the Chestnut parking. Again, there's 59 spaces there. A few of those spaces are currently used by the St. Teresa Memorial Hall. I believe there's 7 spaces. So those 7 spaces would be replaced in some fashion on site in a way that's accessible for the church. We'd put another 32 spaces that would be open to the public, again, replacing a number of those 59, and the remainder would be put on the street as on-street parking, where there currently is no on-street parking. With respect to traffic, of course, anything you do is going to generate some amount of traffic. I would suggest, based on, I'm not a traffic expert, but having heard many traffic experts, I don't think what we're proposing would be crippling. Again, we know what the cap is in terms of the residential density. Again, the higher end being 48 units, and some amount of non-residential, which again, I don't think would cripple the road network or change the level of service.
Thank
Based
you.
on my planner's opinion.
No, thank you for that. I
Disclaimer.
think the parking explanation was really good, though. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Appreciate the question.
Okay, excellent. Councilman
Yes.
Smallwood?
Thank you very much for your presentation. That was very informative. And, I'm certainly not a real estate expert, but I'm assuming the condos are for sale condos, so for purchase, correct? And then obviously the rental is rental. And as the mandatory set aside is 15% for rental, 20% for purchase.
Correct.
Okay. Just in my own, this is my personal view. I felt like if fair share housing were actually serious about affordable housing, it would be the opposite. There should be, it's much more affordable to rent than to purchase a condo, especially here in Summit. Some of the new condos that are going up are anywhere from $900,000 to $1.6 million. If we're serious about affordable housing, what is the downside of increasing that 15% to 20%? Or do we have to use the mandatory 15% for rental?
So we've thought about this in pretty great detail, and one of the major considerations is, again, to stay consistent with what the city has done in its other overlay zones, to stay true or remain consistent with its settlement agreement, and also that it's consistent with the mandatory set-aside. So the 15-20% split is, that's the state of New Jersey that prescribed that.
Right.
And, having, been involved in Summit, and I think our firm represents about maybe 50 other municipalities throughout New Jersey. We also represent private developers in other towns. And what we constantly hear is that increasing the set-aside for rental projects above 15% creates a challenge. Can it be done? Full disclosure, it could be done. But here we're trying to have a site that's developed in a way that doesn't limit, again, the creative, development solutions for the site. I would suggest that a subsequent step, again, assuming the ordinance moves along, that, affordable housing could be discussed further with a prospective developer. Again, we're merely creating a minimum,
Right.
so we have a guarantee, and we can make this site a mechanism in the city's housing plan.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilwoman Hamlet, go ahead. Is anybody else going to speak before? Just want to make sure. Go ahead.
A couple of things, Councilman Smallwood. As our planner here just discussed, we can create incentives in that RFP. So we can create incentives for more affordable housing in certain instances. This is certainly specific and consistent with our DRO, so we spent a lot of time talking about how consistency is defensible in our Mount Laurel committee meetings that were led by our attorneys and our planners. And, I think that in certain instances, when you look at the ordinance specifically, if they were to do a minimum of 30 units, we're already requiring 7 affordable, which equates to about 23%. Now, obviously, that drops off as you go up. But, you know, I think we're being almost more proactive, and it's impressive that we didn't have to say a minimum of 7 at 30 units, but we wanted to take that extra step to show our commitment to affordable housing by saying, you know what, if you only do a minimum of 30 units and another building with 30 units, each building would have a minimum of 7 units. So you'd already have 14 units at that level. So the other thing I wanted to ask you, and I know we don't like to bring up the trigger word, Broad Street West, but from a floor area ratio perspective, what was the 144 unit proposed at Broad Street West, FAR?
Glad I looked this up.
Was it like 300%?
It was, right, so it was a little over 300% in one iteration of.
Yeah, so I think it's important to educate the public that that proposal was 300% floor area ratio, and this one is, it's 115%, Tom? Or 100,
Correct.
113, 115?
115, yes.
And then Tyronal Park on Broad and Morris is 113, or?
No, that was just under
That's-
1%.
Okay, and then Gateway 1 is 113.
Correct,
Parmley Place,
yes.
right, okay, so Parmley Place is 113, Tyronal Park is
Intercom.
just about 1, and I think that got back down from 1.3 to 1 or something, I can't remember.
They started high, and there was some whittled down, and ultimately they got an approval. for it.
And I just want to give the public confidence that the best thing I think about this overlay zone is it provides a lot of public input. This will go to the planning board for a consistency review. We go through all these processes, and then once the bids are received, those developers go back to the planning board, and the public can come and talk about traffic and parking and all of these specific things, because at this moment, we don't know what this site is going to look like. So that would be the opportunity for the public to specifically get involved in that project and how that would look. So just want to mention that.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Councilman, thank you for that clarification, by the way.
Councilman Vartan.
I have no question, I just have a comment. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. My questions were answered. I'm glad you said it, Delia, because I think it's important. And no disrespect to the marketing people. I do want to make it clear that this ordinance and what we're talking about is the Broad Street West properties. As a community, we've been talking about this for many years. I think it's probably fair to say the most community engagement on any single topic in the last decade has been on Broad Street West. I think it's also fair to say that community engagement has been the most important and most significant driver behind the decisions made surrounding the property. And so now you have a new council, and with it a new proposal for how to handle the Broad Street West properties. I want simply to say, I hope the community will continue to engage vigorously to evaluate what is being proposed here, demand explanations of the process and how decisions are being made, and speak out. Please continue to share your opinion on what is best for this property and for Summit. My vote in support of the introduction tonight is a vote for the continuation of this extremely important community conversation. Thank you.
Council President, can we, no,
Let me go to Councilwoman Hamlet first.
Thank you, Council President. I just want to see if City Administrator Rogers, we were talking today, and one of the questions I said to him, I said, Michael, if you sold the properties today, what would you do? What would you do with the money? And I think it's an important conversation because this is a tax rateable and it's a revenue. So, Michael, would you mind just explaining sort of what our obligations are and how this would benefit the city from a financial perspective?
Well, post-sale, whatever we get in as far as proceeds, I would assume it's more than $1.45 million, which is a note we still owe on 7 Cedar Street, so that's what that would pay off. Consider that as a mortgage. You pay off your mortgage when you sell the property. That's what you would have to do. I would expect this to generate, this overlay to generate considerably more. So yes, that's the main obligation we have up front from that.
Okay. Councilman Boyer.
I'm good. I just wanted to clarify that this is not Broad Street West. This is a different project. This is the Morris Broad Crossroads overlay zone, right? There's no building being developed here yet. We're just We are just voting on whether or not to change the designation to an overlay zone, correct? Yes, okay.
Yes, this is an overlay zone. Sorry, I should.
Just one other point, just thinking about what else will change. Clearly, you don't get much revenue out of these properties, so that's a big consideration. It has been for some time. Whatever goes on in these properties will generate far more than what's being generated currently.
Right, okay. Councilman Smollett?
And I mean, currently, since we own the property behind the firehouse, we've lost that tax revenue that we previously were getting, correct?
No, it's a taxable property. The problem right now is that it's barely filled. We have, I think, one tenant in there, so it's not generating a whole lot of revenue to offset what just
When it was privately
utility
owned.
work. Yeah, when it was fully occupied, we were definitely our net income was greater. It's just not generating anything, and the taxes on that are just a little over $29,000. And so we're essentially paying that to ourselves, but it's a taxable property.
Right. But we're paying the debts.
Yeah, essentially right now we're paying what we need to pay for that. Plus interest on our notes, like there's cost to this that we want to do away with. We want to pay that off. So.
Councilwoman Hamlet?
I was just going to say, we talked about it today, and our CFO last year, we walked through the costs associated with the expenses of seven-seater and the taxes of $28,000 or $29,000. It's certainly a cost. I think we don't make any money there, that's for sure.
Right, okay. And just to confirm for me, it's another overlay zone, similar, we have 7, right?
7 existing.
Currently, okay. And the zoning, we're not building, we're out of development, right? So it's just an overlay for zoning. And the, you looked at Ty-Connolly, I think it is? What's it? Tri-Connolly, I think we'll get it right. Parmalee and other zoning that has been, that the community has had an appetite for.
Correct.
And the final thing is I like to hear that potentially we could incentivize, to increase the numbers for affordable housing within an agreement. So I think that's what I heard tonight. Is that right?
That's
Is that
it.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it.
All right. Are there any other questions? No? Statements? Okay.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, great. Thank you,
Very good.
Tom.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it. Thanks for coming. Okay. Roll call vote, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Boyer.
Aye.
Ms. Hamlet.
Aye.
Mr. Miniger.
Aye.
Mr. Pulaski.
Aye.
Mr. Smallwood.
Aye.
Mr. Vartan.
Aye.
President Allen.
Aye, motion carries. Okay.
The hearing.
The hearing, before you walk away, we are having a special meeting for the hearing on Tuesday, June 11th. So our next council meeting is June 5th, but the actual hearing, we wanted to give it an extra week for everybody. It's going to be Tuesday, June 11th at 7:30. Okay? Councilman Hamlet?
Did you mention when the planning board meeting is?
Well, I think you mentioned it, but I'll just say it again. So the planning board meeting is next Monday.
It's May 28th,
I'm sorry, because Monday is the holiday.
Tuesday.
Tuesday, May 28th at 7,
I believe they meet at
I
7:30.
think it's 7:30.
7:30. Please go to cityofsummit.org and look up the planning meeting. But that will be the consistency review, right? Okay, and then back here on June 11th. All right, thank you, Mr. Behrens. All right. Good. All right, on to resolutions. I'm just going to give everybody a moment, okay? On to resolutions. Councilman Miniger.
Thank you, Council President. This is number 11306, and this resolution authorizes execution of a grant agreement and acceptance of a grant from the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness Cybersecurity Grant Program. This grant will allow the city to benefit from a partnership with a top endpoint protection platform at a savings of over $40,000 over the next 4 years compared to our current vendor. I move to adopt this resolution.
I second.
Great. Council comments? Public comments? Okay, hearing none.
Sorry,
Yep.
Council President. Sorry.
Go ahead,
I
Councilwoman Hamlet.
just wanted to confirm that it says for fiscal year 2022, I'm assuming that this is just an old copy here, that Andy, you know, if you saw this.
No, I think that's the grant year when it was,
Oh, so-
it just corresponds with that grant.
So we don't need to change it?
No.
Okay. Okay, that's it.
That's it? Okay. We're going to take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Councilman Miniger.
Thank you, Council President. This is number 11314, and this resolution authorizes the appointment of the Deputy Tax Assessor. Union County Board of Taxation requires that we appoint the Deputy Tax Assessor via resolution. Per closed session discussion, David Shapiro will be appointed to the role of Deputy Tax Assessor for a 4-year term. I move to adopt this resolution.
I second.
Excellent. Council comments? Public comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, on to capital projects and community services. Councilwoman Hamlet.
Yes, this is resolution ID number 11213, resolution authorizing the City of Summit's participation in the State Development and Redevelopment State Plan Cross-Acceptance Process. I would like to move this resolution for introduction.
Second.
Excellent. Council comments? Yeah.
I'd just like to take an opportunity for Tom to come up again. I know it's been a long night, but I think it's important.
Yeah.
It's easier for
I
Tom
agree.
to explain what this is. It's a really complicated subject. We've been discussing it extensively in the Mount Laurel Committee, and we will also be discussing it on the Planning Board. I'm a member of the Planning Board, so we will also be discussing it at the Planning Board.
Okay, I'll give a brief overview. So as was mentioned, or wasn't mentioned, I'll mention. So the state last adopted the State Development and Redevelopment Plan, shorthand SDRP, in 2001. It's supposed to be updated periodically. It just so happens that they're now attempting to update the state plan as the recent 4th round affordable housing legislation was enacted in March of this year. The new state plan, or preliminary plan, was supposed to have been made public on April 8th of this year. It's now May 21st, and the public has yet to have it. So there initially was a prescribed deadline for cross-acceptance. There's a question of whether or not that deadline will continue. But in any event, the state has established a cross-acceptance process, which means that municipalities, counties, and the state are all supposed to coordinate and discuss and review policies amongst each other, and with the goal of achieving consensus and some amount of consistency. And the way that's supposed to be done is that the state has broken up the conversations on a regional basis. And in this case, Union County is taking the reins as the designated negotiating entity for Summit and all municipalities in Union County. So they've reached out to Summit, to some extent, basically have put us in a holding pattern, and there's not much to do until we get the plan. But they've indicated that there will be a process moving forward, that they, in fact, will be the sort of coordinating, negotiating entity for Union County, and that they'll be establishing meeting dates for Summit to participate in. Again, we're waiting for the plan to have something to react to. The purpose for the resolution tonight is for the city to formally indicate its interest in participating in the process. That was one of the steps to participate in the process. So once that's submitted to the county, you'll be included on all communication moving forward and be allowed to participate in that process. And again, the idea is that you can share information, talk about policies. Summit can convey what its land use goals, objectives, and policies are. There may be points where there are inconsistencies with either the state's plans, planning policies and goals, or the county's. That's supposed to be worked out through various forms of mediation. If it can't be worked out, there are ways to bring up those issues with the state. And again, the idea is to achieve some level of consensus, to promote cooperation, because ultimately when a municipality adopts a master plan document or other planning document, it's supposed to address consistency with the state plan. So it's all supposed to work together. That's how it's designed, from sort of a top-down approach, where the state plan has sort of general planning policies and goals. It has the state divided into a number of planning areas, ranging from urban areas to environmentally sensitive areas. Summit is currently mostly listed in Planning Area 1, which is the most urbanized designation for the state. And there are areas, environmentally sensitive areas of Summit, which are within Planning Area 5, which are environmentally sensitive areas. We suspect that designation won't change much, but something to pay attention to. Again, the new mapping, and the mapping basically dictates the policies that are applied to those designations. So again, we'll keep an eye out. I have nothing to report at this point, but this is the first step of the cross-acceptance process, is adopting this resolution.
Excellent. Thank you. Does anybody have a question for Mr. Behrens while we're here? And just to clarify, in the simplest of terms, our numbers will be negotiated with the county, right?
Numbers? So.
Our housing numbers. When we negotiate, it's going to be with the county, not
Well,
the state.
Well, there's two separate things. So the state plan involves negotiating with the county. The new program, as they call it, is actually with the state, and that relates to the affordable housing need numbers. So they're on similar trajectories, and they're both happening at the same time, in other words. So, but they are two separate processes.
Okay, just want to clarify.
Sure. No,
Thank you.
for that.
All right, thank you.
Have a good day.
Yeah, thanks. All right.